Chapter 7 to 8. It was more of a cool day today in the city of Axel. People were wearing slightly more thick clothes as of right now. I was dressed in my casual black jacket clothes as I was making my way towards the guild with my hands in my pockets. Man, the days have been blending together. I've been so bored. It truly has been boring the past, what has felt like, a month. The commotion and partying after Verdia's death died down a week or so after the battle, and people were slowly going back to adventuring. There were practically no good quests since all the hard quests have been done. At this point I'd be willing to do an escort job just to go somewhere new and get paid. I could go back to Tanaka's island for some R&R, but I still want to do something. Speaking of Tanaka, I had received a letter not too long ago saying that the excursion had been fully constructed and money was slowly coming in. Apparently it was a smashing hit, and some of the reviews he had seen were saying that the view is to die for. He was even banking on the fact a huge dragon was slain there, obviously an exaggeration to make more money, but I didn't care. And my place out there had been built, and he said I could come by any time to see it and even bring friends as well, possibly have me invest in more attractions for a larger stake in the island. I did grin at that though, since the money coming in was nice. I love this absurd luck sometimes. It wasn't much longer until I made it to the guild, and it was fairly empty. The only thing of note was Kazuma and his party at the quest board trying to find something, and the picking seemed slim. They hadn't noticed me entering yet, so I approached Darkness from behind and leaned close to her ear. "Boo," I said quietly. She let out a small eep and turned around. When she noticed it was me, she seemed embarrassed that she got scared, which caused me to laugh. After a moment she asked, "Looking for a quest today?" Sigh, hopefully there hasn't been anything good in weeks. Kazuma turned. "I know what you mean. I just want a quest with a good payout so I can start getting some money after paying off someone's. Destruction of a city wall. You told me to, guess who? Yeah, but not to cause a tsunami and almost destroy the town." It then descended into one of their childish arguments. Megumin sighed. "It's been like this since it happened." "I can imagine," I said, then glanced at the board. "There is a quest for a one-shot bear, but that would be too easy and not as interesting. We have a snow sprite gathering, but that's just dull. Couple wolf-slaying quests, marriage counselor, some Pete I work for a woman who thinks her husband is cheating." I huffed. "Still nothing good." "Kazuma," shouted Megumin, "what about this one-shot bear? I'd like to see how it stands up against my one-shot attack." "Hell no," he shouted back. "What about this?" came the voice of Darkness, "a quest for a ravenous pack of wolves. I can already feel their slobber and sharp teeth biting into me." She started to hug herself as one of her odd fantasies started to play in her head. "I'm not gonna feed your gross habit, you pervert." What? "I'm not a pervert." "Yes you are." Me and Kazuma both deadpanned. She then let out a huff and turned her head. They eventually decided on the snow sprite quest and promptly left at Darkness' behest. She gave me a wave and said goodbye as they left. With nothing else to do, I approached Luna at her desk. "Anything good behind there?" She said a quick hello before saying, "What do you mean?" "I want to go on a quest that's interesting, not necessarily hard but interesting." She shuffled through some papers for a moment before coming across one that she seemed surprised at. "Oh. It seems there's one that came in today specifically requesting you." Raising an eyebrow in interest, I leaned forward on her desk with one arm. "Requesting me, you say?" "Yeah, apparently some noble a few towns over is having her daughter get married, but he's received threats of having his daughter and or him hurt, possibly killed, if she goes through with the marriage. And this involves me. How?" "The letter says they heard of your part taken in slaying a demon general and some of your other exploits. Seems his daughter is a fan of yours." "Interesting. What is the payout?" "It says the price is negotiable, but they're willing to pay 150,000 eris." I then stood up straight, crossed my arms and closed my eyes and thought, that's a little on the lower end, but it does seem somewhat interesting. I don't see the harm. It's also a reason to go to another town." Opening my eyes, I gave my response, "Sure, seems interesting." "Wonderful. It says that if you agree they want you to meet them at this inn to discuss details." She slid me a piece of paper with the name of the inn. The inn was a more expensive one I heard about that's on the other side of Axel. Think it was next to some magic shop I hadn't been to yet. Turning to leave, I gave her a lazy backhand wave as I left the guild to head to the inn. There was that magic shop close by, so I might stop there before I meet the people. The shopkeeper is apparently some retired adventurer, so I wouldn't mind checking the place out. It took about 20 minutes, but I could see the magic shop next to a small stone bridge going across a stream, with the inn being on the other side. Wiz's Magic Shop. Basic name. Upon entering the relatively small building, a bell above the door chimed and I was greeted to multiple aisles/shelves filled to the brim with magic items ranging from potions, daggers, scrolls, and other small knickknacks. There was no one at the counter, but I heard some shuffling and a muffled "coming" from some back room. I stuck my hands in my pockets and after a minute of shuffling sounds from the back room, a woman wearing purple robes with a gold outline, with long brown hair that had a piece sticking up on the top and pale white skin. "Welcome to my shop, I'm Wiz, how can I help you?" Cutting herself off, she stared at me for a moment and almost seemed frightened. I tilted my head and raised a brow. "Is something the matter?" She stuttered and mumbled something about me coming to kill her. Narrowing my eyes slightly, I began to appraise her with the skill from my eyes. "She seems normal other than wait, she's a lich." She continued to wait as she seemed to shrink under my gaze for a moment. "She seems harmless, but until I upgrade my appraisal I won't be able to know more. She is probably sensing the divine blood running through me, which wouldn't be surprising." I raised my right hand. "Relax, I'm not here to kill you, lich." She exhaled in relief as I lowered my hand into my pocket. "Thank you, I'm surprised you knew, but I can sense something in you and it had me frightened." Humming in response, I looked around. "What kind of magic items do you sell?" "Mostly just some odd knickknacks." Walking forward to a shelf, I grabbed some potion in a small vial. Appraising it, I was able to gather it was something that exploded. Turning to her slightly, I asked, "I can tell this explodes, but what's the condition?" "You have a good eye," she smiled. "When the liquid is put on a surface it releases a sweet-smelling fragrance that is almost irresistible, and when someone touches it, it explodes." She finished the last part, putting her arms in the air like a child. "That is incredibly odd." She lowered her arms. "Yeah, no one's really wanted to buy it since they can use a spell to make stuff explode." "How lethal is it?" "A drop is nothing special, it kind of just crackles, but multiple drops is enough to burn the skin significantly, and half the vial or a full vial can easily kill." Giving it some thought, I decided that I could find a use for it. "I'll take 3, she seemed surprised. "You will?" Which I then shrugged in response as a sort of, "Why not?" which she got really happy about. "Fantastic. Is there anything else you see that you like?" Giving a quick appraisal of the rest of the shop, I didn't really find anything too useful, so I shook my head. "No, this will be all." "That'll be 1,000 eras, please." Little expensive. I did a mental shrug and opened a gate above her counter and dropped a pouch containing the gold. She was shocked at the use of my gate but got over it and took the coin, so I took the 3 vials and sent them to my gate. "Wow, that's pretty amazing. What was that?" She tilted her head in questioning. I gave a small smirk. "My Gate of Babylon, it allows me to store a variety of items as well as fire weapons from it." "That's incredibly useful," she responded. "Are you an adventurer?" "Yes, what of it?" "Just curious to where you be going." "I have a quest a few towns over, but first I need to meet the client at the inn across the stone bridge." I made my way to the door. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Gilgamesh," I replied, opening the door to leave. She was nice. I may come back in the future to see if she has anything else interesting. Closing the door, I made my way across the bridge to the inn. It wasn't massive or anything, but it was one of the more nice places in the city, plus it was expensive from what I've heard. Upon entering the building, I was greeted to the smell of food and the clanking of cutlery. "Place seems nice." The entrance went straight into the dining area that had fancy tables and chairs covered in white cloth and multiple chandeliers throughout the building. A man who seemed to be in his 50s with a well-trimmed mustache and a black suit with a white shirt behind the front desk noticed my approach. "Good evening, sir, how may I help you?" he asked with a slight British accent. "I'm meeting someone here regarding a quest to accompany them to a wedding and act as security." His eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Oh, you must be Gilgamesh, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please follow me." He gave a light bow and walked into the dining area. Following the man for a moment, he led me to a small round table that had 3 people seated, an older man with black hair wearing a nice brown suit, a woman who seemed younger, but still old, with blonde hair and was wearing a red frilly dress of sorts, and finally a much younger woman who seemed to be around 18 or so with black hair, gold eyes, average height, and wearing a blue frilly dress. The man who led me here bowed slightly. "Mr. Hajime," he looked in our direction, "the adventurer Gilgamesh has arrived." The now dubbed Mr. Hajime stood up and walked over. "Thank you, my good man." The waiter then left and he turned to me. "Pleasure to meet you, I'm Hajime Toketsu." He extended his hand. Taking my right hand from my pocket, I shook his extended hand likewise. "Please sit and let us discuss the details." We then walked over to the table and I sat across from him, his wife and his daughter. Sitting down, I spoke. "So I procured a glass of wine from my gate," making them stare in slight awe, especially the daughter. "You wish to hire me as security for your daughter's wedding?" He seemed to shuffle around for a moment. "Well, you see, I had to put that on the request because you may not have showed up if I said what I actually needed." I narrowed my eyes, they were practically glowing. "You best tell the truth, I will know if you're lying." He was slightly frightened, so he cleared his throat to get his mind straight. We have a distant cousin that has been obsessed with my daughter, so to speak. I could already guess where this was going, and we believe he's involved with some bad people, but there's no evidence, so no one can do anything about it. I don't want her to be abducted, used as some toy, or married off to him. I can't legally kill someone, so do you wish for me to gather information on him to have him arrested? Not exactly. He has some of the guards and politicians in his pocket, so anything you'd find probably wouldn't help. Didn't even need appraisal to see he was nervous about telling me something. I sighed. Out with it then. Would you marry my daughter? I was mid-sip on my wine when I stopped myself from choking and composed myself. He wasn't lying, that's for sure. You wish for me to marry your daughter? The daughter in question squirmed in her seat a little, seeming uncomfortable when the wife spoke up. Not really marry, but pretend to. He won't do anything drastic as of right now, and the only way to draw him out, so to speak, is to get his attention this way. This would make him incredibly angry, and he'll do something stupid in retaliation. I closed my eyes in thought. Seems like a decent plan. I said I was bored and wanted something interesting, but fake marrying someone was something I didn't expect. Shifting my gaze towards Hajime's daughter. And what is your take in this, Ms.? It's Cirilla. I'm frankly scared of him, and he's a horrible person. I just want for him to get what he deserves, she said with resolute. Very well. I shall accept this quest. They all seemed very happy. What is your full plan? Hajime spoke up. We're hosting a dinner at our manor in a few days where we plan for you to propose to our daughter during a toast. The man we're looking out for is named Henry Fraser, a distant cousin of ours. He will be attending? I asked. Yes, spoke the wife, we're hoping this will spark a rage in him so he acts up either right then and there or during the wedding. I see. When do you plan to leave to head to your home? I still have some business here in Axel, spoke Hajime, but we will be ready to leave tomorrow morning around 9 o'clock, so if you could meet us here around 8:30. Very well, I stood up. I shall meet you here tomorrow. They said their goodbyes and thank you as I left the inn's dining area. The rest of the previous day went by fairly quickly with not much else going on. I wasn't able to leave Axel since I would need to have been here early. I was relaxing in the guild hall before I had to leave, and I was spending that time by drinking some coffee inside a cup that said, Number 1 Adventurer. Once again I'm reminded of how this life is different from my old one. I'm getting married. First off, I drink alcohol, have fans now apparently, and I'm drinking coffee. Considering I hated coffee and alcohol before. Taking another sip of my coffee, which finished it off, I looked out the window, and judging by the position of the sun it should have been around 8 o'clock. Best I get moving. After dismissing my mug I stood to leave. Upon my approach to the exit of the guild the doors opened and in came darkness. Oh, she said when our gaze met, good morning, you're up early. Putting my hands in my pockets I responded, morning, I could say the same to you as well. She rubbed the back of her head. I wanted to get an early start on the day, hopefully find a difficult quest for the party. She did a small fist bump at her side. Are you off on a quest? Giving a small smirk I replied, I'm off to get married. I then walked past her as her face went from smiling to neutral, then to a shocked face as I left the guild. It took about 30 seconds before she burst out the door and ran up to me grabbing my arm. What do you mean you're getting Emma married? She was pink in the face. As I said, I'm off to get married, still smirking. To whom? A lovely lady named Cirilla Toketsu. Toketsu. The noble family. You know of them? I questioned. Yes, while they're fairly rich they're one of the more respected noble families out there. You know of the standings of nobles? She fidgeted slightly. I've just heard of them in passing. She's definitely hiding something, but I can tell she's getting upset now. She seemed down, so I ruffled her hair a bit, bringing her out of her stupor. She looked up to me when I smirked. Don't worry, I'm just marrying her to draw out an unsavory cousin who has an obsession with her. She seemed relieved as I removed my hand, but then she pouted. Could have said that before. Ha ha ha, I let out a short laugh. It was more amusing to see your expression. She huffed and looked away. Were you jealous? I leaned in closer. She whipped around. Of course not. I was just curious. I chuckled in response and turned to leave. I must be off. I gave a backwards wave as she said bye. And that's another thing new. I tease people, which I almost never did. Guess I can blame it on the gilitude. It didn't take much longer to reach the inn, so once I arrived I walked right in and greeted the same man from yesterday at the front. We exchanged brief words before he led me to a table to wait for the Toketsus, and it took about 10 minutes before someone came down a stairs and opened a door at the back of the dining room. Cirilla emerged from the double doors carrying a suitcase, presumably with her belongings. She looked around the room and noticed me. I gave a small smile and a nod. She then made her way over to me and sat down a seat away from me, and she seemed nervous. Good morning, she said quietly. To you as well, I responded. Will your mother and father be here soon? She nodded. Do you drink coffee at all? Yes, with some cream and sugar. I nodded and had a gate open up just in front of her on the table with a small cup of steaming coffee appearing from it. She stared at it in awe for a moment and looked at me, so I motioned my hand at the cup so she picked it up and blew on it slightly before taking a sip. Her eyes widened slightly. Wow, this is amazing. I chuckled. My gate has many wondrous features, coffee brewing being just one of the many. Safe to say I like hearing praise. We sat in silence for a few minutes until I noticed Hajime and his wife emerge from the same doors Cirilla had. We both stood from our seats with Hajime greeting us. Good morning, are you set to leave? We both nodded. Alright then, if we leave now we can make some good ground. It'll take a day or two to get home and I have some food packed for the trip that we can eat on the go, maybe even have a picnic or two. A picnic definitely sounded nice. It didn't take long for everything to be loaded onto their wagon, especially since I just stored most of the luggage in my gate to save time, which they were thankful for. Hajime drove the wagon himself, so me, Cirilla and her mother, her name is Cheryl, which I finally learned after having a short conversation with her, were sitting in the covered part of the wagon which had red cushions lining the seats to make it more comfortable. While it wasn't one of those fancy wagons you see princesses or royalty and such in, it was still fairly nice but also respectable since it wasn't glammed up. I spent most of the ride reading a book and having small conversations with everyone. We did make a stop just to tend to the horses as well as have some snacks and stretch our legs. It wasn't till the afternoon, maybe around 1:30 or 2 o'clock, when we stopped for lunch. Pulling off to the side of the road near a small stream, we stopped and slowly exited the wagon, stretching our limbs. Hajime had a good stretch and even heard some joints pop as he stretched and got off the wagon. He let out a sigh and turned to us. Gilgamesh, if you would be so kind and help me tend to the horses while my wife and daughter set up camp. I nodded and headed towards the horses, which were 2 brown horses. We detached the horses from the wagon and led them to the stream where they could get a drink. We can let the horses roam around by themselves, spoke Hajime once they started to drink. Not concerned they may get away. I tilted my head slightly. These horses have been with us for a very long time and we all have some sort of bond with them. They know when they've roamed too far. Plus they seem to like our company. He chuckled as he handed me a brush and we started to brush the horses, which they seemed to enjoy. These are truly great horses, I commended Hajime. Why thank you, he smiled. Do you have any animals yourself? I had a dog some time ago, I spoke slightly somber. I miss my dog, I thought to myself. He was fairly old before I died and I miss him. I had a dog back when I was alive. He was a purebred male Chihuahua who wasn't anything like your average yappy Chihuahua. He was playful, cute, and sometimes a little shit, but even after almost 15 years he was, and hopefully is still, a good boy. I hope he's still alive for my family's sake. I doubt they could handle losing me and him in such a short time. He should still be kicking for a few more years. Hajime noticed my shift in mood. Ah. I'm sorry. I waved him off. It's fine, I've come to terms with it some time ago, which Hajime nodded in understanding. We talked for a few more minutes while tending to the horses. We more or less just talked about animals and the fact that they had a dog back home. A few minutes into our conversation we got pulled out of it by Cirilla and her mother calling us for lunch. It all passed fairly quickly and we spent about an hour relaxing before we got back on the road. Nothing eventful happened for the rest of the trip except the end of our first day traveling. We were stopping for the night and were setting up some tents since we wouldn't all fit in the wagon, plus only the seats had some cushions and not the floor. The Toketsus began setting up their tents when I walked off slightly and used my gate to set up my tent extremely quick. Hajime was helping his daughter set up her tent when they noticed me setting up mine. They were amazed and kind of annoyed with how easy I set up the tent, and they ignored their tent for a moment, which was a mistake. A gust of wind swept through the small forest clearing we were in and swept the tent away into a tree, tearing it up a bit. They tried to catch it but they failed in their attempts and it was fairly funny. I let out an audible laugh which caused Cirilla to pout since it was her tent and her parents' tent would be too small for all 3 of them to fit in. Still chuckling I walked over to them and opened up a gate to store the tent that got ripped up so it could be repaired inside. My gate will repair your tent but it takes a moment. Thank you, but my daughter won't be able to sleep comfortably in our tent or the wagon, spoke Hajime. Do you have a spare in that gate of yours? Unfortunately I do not, but I have a spare bedroll and room in mine. I pointed my thumb behind me towards my tent. Are you sure that's alright? Asked Cirilla. She seemed nervous and embarrassed. Giving a slight chuckle in response I spoke. I won't do anything to you, you have my word. Hajime patted me on the shoulder. Thank you and I trust you. I nodded and led Cirilla to my tent, she asked me to stay outside for a moment so she could change into her sleeping gown, so I let her in first. When she was finished and said I could enter, I flashed off my jacket and shoes, so I was just wearing my black pants and white long-sleeve shirt. Nothing fancy or interesting happened after that as we went to bed. When morning eventually came and I woke up before the rest of the group and cooked breakfast for everyone. I procured some tables, cooking utensils, as well as started a small fire to cook everything. I made the basic eggs and bacon, which they were grateful for and were surprised that I was a good cook. It was only eggs and bacon, so you couldn't really mess that up. The rest of the trip went by pretty smooth with nothing extraordinary happening. We were only a few minutes away from being able to see the city, and once we reached there we would head through it towards the Toketsu Manor. I was sitting up next to Hajime as he was showing me how to properly drive a wagon when he spoke up. "I don't mean to disrespect your appearance," he spoke sheepishly, "but your outfit is more rebellious and more people than Henry Fraser will be upset about it. We want to have everyone like you to make it seem more believable, since some of the people attending will be stuck-up nobles." I nodded at Hajime understandingly. While dressing more rebellious may get an interesting reaction from Henry I should play to the masses, as they say. After that thought I flashed on a new set of clothes from my gate, and it consisted of a blue button shirt, the top button being open to show some of my chest, with the sleeves rolled up to the forearms revealing a checkered pattern, white pants with a brown leather belt, black dress shoes, as well as some gold bracelets on my forearms and some gold earrings, as well as a gold necklace of sorts. Caster Gilgamesh's alternate costume from F/Go. "Shall this suffice?" I said while making sure my hair was flattened down properly. He nodded. "Perfect, a good mix." Not very long after I could see the city, and it almost reminded me of Axel, but it was much larger and there didn't seem to be much of an adventurer presence in the town, so it seemed fairly laid back. Hajime talked with one of the guards upon entry through the town, and they seemed to know each other fairly well as we got in with next to no trouble. The townsfolk would occasionally turn to wave at Hajime. "You seem to be well liked," I spoke. He chuckled lightly. "I try to be the best person I can be and give back to the community when I can." Riding through the streets it seemed like a town straight out of the 1700s to 1800s, which granted some sense of familiarity but still with a fantasy element. It took a little while to get past the crowds since we were in a wagon, but the background noise of the city was actually kind of nice. Once we got through the main part of the town we headed to the more rich side of the city where there was less people but more nice buildings and more well-dressed people around. We were practically on the outskirts of the city and there weren't many buildings around, it was more open fields with some trees around. I remembered Hajime said something during the trip about where they lived. They lived almost outside the town so they could have an easier time going in. Most nobles were scattered close to the town but still outside it, but some did have places in the city. Once we pulled up to the house I couldn't help but admire the place. It was what you'd expect from a noble manor set in a fantasy world, but there was definitely a very homey feel to it. Upon pulling up to the house via a small road that led to the house we were greeted by a well-dressed older man with graying hair and a mustache. "Mr. Hajime," he spoke, "a pleasure to see you again." He bowed. "I must ask who this young fellow is," he gestured to me. "This is Gilgamesh and he's the one I employed for that quest." "Ah, I see. A pleasure to meet you. My name is Reginald. I am the head butler in service of the Toketsus." The butler bowed. "Likewise," I nodded, getting down from the wagon to assist the ladies in the back. Reginald followed me to the back of the wagon where I assisted Cyrilla out the back and Reginald assisted Cheryl. "I must ask," spoke Reginald, "where is all your luggage? There doesn't seem to be much in here." I snapped my fingers and opened a gate on the ground where all the luggage I was carrying for them slowly rose from the gate. Reginald seemed shocked for a moment before he composed himself and clapped his hands, summoning a few other maids and butlers to retrieve it all. We then made our way through the front doors where we were immediately greeted to barking as a golden retriever ran into the main hall, extremely excited. Cyrilla immediately dropped to her knees and caught the dog in a hug. "Oh, Aaron, I missed you." She was petting the dog as it licked her face happily. I kneeled down next to them and let the dog sniff my hand since he went on edge almost immediately. Once he sniffed my hand and seemed to accept me, I started to pet him and scratch behind his ears, which he seemed to enjoy. The other three chuckled at the sight, with Hajime breaking the silence. "I assume everything is good for tonight, Reginald?" He nodded. "It is currently about an hour past noon and the guests shall be arriving for the dinner around 5 o'clock, so it gives you some time for lunch and a short rest." Cheryl sighed. "A nice warm bath would be amazing." "I shall have someone draw a warm bath for you, miss, and anyone else who wishes for one," spoke Reginald. "That would be nice," I piped up and stood up, eliciting a nod from the butler, and almost immediately after that I saw some maids appear. "They shall guide you to a room where you may take a bath," spoke Reginald as I followed the maids. They led me up a set of stairs and down a few corridors until we reached a door that was open, revealing a rather nice bathroom with a tub full of water that was letting off some light wisps of steam. They offered to take my clothes to be washed, but I declined the offer as my gate would do that for me. After they left, I wasted no time in flashing off my clothes and lowering myself into the bath and almost melted into it. Letting out a sigh, I thought to myself, this house is bitchin', I am not gonna lie. The Toketsu seem to be really respected by the common folk, which gives me more reason to trust them, and the few days I've spent with them have been different but nice. I grabbed some soap which smelt like lavender and started to wash myself. How am I gonna get this Fraser guy to slip up and do something? I could try taunting and flaunting the fact I'm marrying the girl he likes, which could easily work. I dunked my head to get my hair wet, should definitely not use my gate, while news traveled fast about Verdia's defeat my appearance may not have. I want him to think I'm just some arrogant asshole, so he makes a move. If he knows who I am, he'll know he can't stop me and will take more drastic measures which could endanger the family. I must have been lost in thought for a while because I heard a knock at the door. Yes. Lunch is ready, sir, spoke Reginald from the other side. Splendid, I will make my way down. I heard him walk off, so I slowly rose from the tub and flashed the same set of clothes back on. Before I left, I checked my appearance in the mirror and gained a small smirk. I do like this look a fair bit, I'll definitely wear this set of clothes more. When I made my way down, we had a small lunch and nothing special happened other than me telling them what my game plan is to bring out Henry. They agreed that me not using my gate or mentioning that I was the one that fought a demon king general toe to toe would be good, and it would be easier to catch him with his guard down. After lunch everyone went to go get ready for the guests, so I didn't have much to do since I was already as prepared as I could be for this. I mostly just roamed the house before I found my way to the courtyard where tables and chairs were being set up for this dinner. Seeing as I wasn't needed and no one was looking, I procured a comfy lawn chair and a glass of wine from my gate. I sat down in the sun on one of the many grassy areas in their large courtyard. After a few sips of wine, I could hear panting next to me, so I turned my gaze to see Aaron there staring at me. Sitting up, I pet the top of his head with a small smile. Hey there, little guy. He seemed to like the pets as most dogs do. You like fetch? He perked up and his tail started to wag. I'll take that as a yes, I chuckled while looking around. Not noticing anyone looking at me, I had a ball appear in my hand from my gate, causing Aaron to stand on all fours staring intently at the small ball. With a flick of the wrist, I sent the ball flying a good distance before Aaron ran after it. Once he picked it up, he trotted back almost with a smile. We played fetch for a moment until I felt someone's presence behind me. He really likes you, spoke the now revealed Cirilla. Chuckling lightly as Aaron came back, it seems he does. I threw it again and procured another chair since no one was looking. She sat down, and now that I had a full view of her, she was wearing a nice strapless white dress that showed off her natural beauty. She said thank you before sitting down. Once she sat down, Aaron came back, but instead of getting ready for another round, he went to drink from a water bowl close by and sit in the shade for a bit. Swirling the glass in my hands, I glanced at her. That dress suits you. She blushed. Thank you, your outfit looks nice as well. I let out a small hum. Well, we talked a bit on the trip here, but is there anything else you wish to know about me? She thought for a moment. What should I call you? You said your name would probably be too recognizable. Michael shall suffice. She nodded. Do you do anything other than adventuring? Perhaps another job, so we don't speak of your adventuring. Ever heard of the Tanaka Island Resort? I've been there a few times with my family. It's an extremely nice place. I have a share in island. She seemed surprised. I killed a giant wyvern on the mountain that's there, and afterwards I paid the owner 2 million eris to make the area an excursion and have a share in the profits. I do also own a place there, so as long as I contribute to the island, I can have a larger share as well as go there when I please. Wow, that's amazing. Chuckling, I responded, I am fairly amazing. We talked for a few more hours about some general topics regarding our lives, and time passed very quickly, and before we knew it, the doors to the courtyard opened and people started to filter out. Cirilla stood up and went to go greet the guests, and Aaron followed behind her. I still sat down but paid attention as the guests came in. One by one she greeted them with a smile, and the guests returned the greetings with their own. It wasn't until the very last guest came in that her smile faltered. Didn't seem too special, but after a short appraisal I knew this was the guy. He stood a few inches taller than me from what I could tell, and he had a fairly square face as he was well built and definitely wasn't ugly. He stood over Cirilla with a smirk. He had short brown hair with a light brown beard on his face, brown eyes, and your standard noble suit, but in the color gray. Hell, the guy seemed a few years older than me and was in his late 20s, the knowledge being granted by my appraisal. They were a little too far for me to hear everything, and there were dozens of people conversing in the courtyard, but I could tell her greeting was forced and Henry was taking it all in. A few people who seemed less than respectable had passed by him a few moments before patting him on the shoulder with small smirks. Having seen enough, I approached the two with my glass of wine still in hand, and Henry seemed to notice my approach but dismissed me. Once I got close, I wrapped my hand around Cyrilla's shoulder and pulled her next to my hip as she was fairly short. I didn't need appraisal to know this angered him, but he kept his expression as calm as he could. "And who's this guy wrapping his arm around you?" "Michael," I spoke with a small smirk, "a pleasure." He let out a humph. "Likewise, I'm gonna get something to drink." He turned to leave, but not before shooting me a glare, which I responded with a smirk. Once he was out of earshot, Cyrilla looked up to me. "Thank you." Didn't know how much longer I could stare at him. "He scares me." "Do not worry, you have me here." I smiled slightly, which she returned the gesture. Hajime and Cheryl emerged a few moments late, and Cheryl spoke. "I see you've met Henry." "Yeah, he doesn't seem very nice, that's for sure." I can still feel him trying to drill a hole through my head with his glare, and sneaking a glance at him, he was staring at me while he was in a small circle of other people. And I should mention now that I will go by Michael for now to keep my name unknown, as to not reveal my adventuring status. They both nodded. "Well, I do have some business partners as well as personal friends here, so feel free to go around and speak to some people before you feel the time is right to do your thing," Hajime said as he walked off to speak to some friends and partners. "It would be best if we are seen together as to not garner suspicion for the proposal," I spoke, which Cyrilla nodded to. "Well then," I wrapped my arm around her a little tighter, "let us get to mingling." "Darling," she stuttered at the last bit for a moment, and we then headed off to mingle. We talked to practically everyone at the party, and most of the guests were surprised at how close we were. After using my cover story as being a shareholder in an island resort, which appeased some of the more stuck-up nobles, we went on to tell how we met some time ago, and on the Toketsu's most recent trip I was invited to this gathering. I acted as charming as possible to gain the favor of the people while still holding some smugness. And I soon became a fan favorite, you could say, as the people I talked to seemed to like me a fair bit. We also talked to some of Cyrilla's other cousins closer to her age that were there, and they were gushing at how cute we were. While some of the adults did that, it was still funny and amusing to see Cyrilla get grilled by her cousins for details. After a few hours of mingling and snacking on some hors d'oeuvres, the sun started to set and a beautiful pink color illuminated the clouds. I looked to Cyrilla and smiled as the courtyard was covered in a magnificent mix of pink and orange from the sun. Grabbing a glass and a small knife from a nearby table, I clinked the glass a few times, drawing everyone's attention away from the sunset towards me. "I have an announcement." They all seemed confused. "Time to see if my acting skill from drama class a few years ago will help me with this. I must admit that recently I have fallen in love." The crowd looked even more confused and were probably thinking I was drunk or something. To quote a famous man, "Being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage." I believe now that I have the courage to do something right now. I turned to Cyrilla and kneeled to the floor, our silhouettes illuminated by the setting sun. "Cyrilla Toketsu," I spoke after kneeling, gaining a shocked gasp from the crowd, "will you take my hand in marriage?" She blushed greatly and had a look of surprise on her before she spoke clearly. Yes, I will." I then pulled a ring from my pocket that I had stored in my gate and placed it on her ring finger, and the people started to clap and cheer. While I was still on my knee, I glanced behind her to see Henry a ways back with an absolute murderous glare. He was shaking with anger, but no one other than the group he was with noticed, and by just a quick glance I could tell they were his lackeys. I gave him a small wink and a smile which went unnoticed by the cheering crowd. He got so angry the glass he was holding that was empty started to crack a bit as he mumbled to himself, "You're dead." He then walked off, signaling his lackeys to follow. This is going to get interesting. The night of the engagement went fairly well, other than seeing people have a reason to get drunk and also congratulate us. The women gushed at the perfectness of my proposal and were slightly jealous since their husbands weren't as romantic. I do feel kind of bad since I'm getting people's hopes up. I then smirked slightly, and she'll probably never have a perfect proposal like that for a while. Where was I, you ask? I'm currently in town wearing my black leather jacket outfit, trying to find a way I could expose Henry. I wasn't a cop or an investigator in my old life, so the most I can do is go off of my instinct and what I do know about the criminal world. And that's what brought me to the main part of the town. I'm trying to find where Henry usually frequents as well as think of places to go on a date, and just so happen to be in the same place as him. Nothing is more annoying than constantly seeing someone you hate everywhere you go, to the point that you think they are stalking you. At least that's what I hope. After about an hour of wandering the town, I finally got my break. I spotted Henry walking with a few of his goons. I blended with the crowd as best I could and slowly followed him throughout the town. His presumably first stop was at a cafe. He waved his goons off and entered the cafe. All right, he likes his coffee alone in the morning, good to know. The cafe itself seemed fairly nice, but there wasn't anything special about it. It's best I stay outside. A little too empty in there and I don't know any illusion magic. I could flash on an elaborate outfit, but I don't have any wigs on hand and I don't even think contact lenses exist in this world. After he drank his coffee, Henry left the cafe and headed further down the street. It's probably best that I don't see him at every location I go to on the date because then it's just gonna be obvious. I'm going to have to pick and choose carefully. It wasn't until about another hour in did I see him go to another place that would be good to see him at. It was surprisingly a golf course of sorts. It was more of a range than a full-blown course and it had a long field of around 500 yards. For the almost year that I've been here, this is the first time I've seen a driving range. Maybe another person from Earth brought the sport here, or it could have already existed. There was a small building with wooden tables scattered around and I could pick up the faint smell of food. Nice, a range and a place to get food. Wouldn't mind coming here either way, honestly. Henry went up to the bar and got a club as well as a basket of golf balls that looked a little odd, seem a bit more roughly made, so it's definitely not been around long, or it could be from the lack of machinery to mass produce them. Trying to keep out of his line of sight, I observed him until he reached about halfway through the bucket. I heard some familiar voices behind me and hid behind a tree that was nearby. It was two of his goons from before. I was already further away from them to begin with, so I couldn't hear the conversations, but I was able to pick up a few words by reading their lips. They were talking about business, and Henry seemed to be smirking at a few of the things that his goon was saying. Humph, seems they're already planning to do something to me. I couldn't pick out much, but I saw one of them mention my name and taking care of him. They spoke in some kind of code from what I could tell, probably so the average guy doesn't hear this and get the authorities. But from what Mr. Toketsu has told me, he probably could get away with it anyway. Henry soon finished his business, had lunch and promptly left the range. I don't think I should follow him much further. I continued down some street. I run the risk of being caught and I don't really want to follow him past dinner. I continued for another 30 or so minutes and eventually decided to leave him be. I've remembered the routes he likes to take, so throughout the date, I can cross paths with him or be on the same street as him at the very least. I decided to walk back the whole way to the Toketsu Manor, so I was in for a long walk. It also gave me more time to think. I think I'll go with my date plan tomorrow and pick another day to follow him around again. He'll be angry, so he might slip up and head somewhere he shouldn't or to where he operates from. I could ask Hajime where he lives and do some scouting, but I doubt he'd make that much of a careless mistake, even in a bout of anger or frustration. It took a few hours to reach the Toketsu Manor, and at some point on the way there I had flashed back on the attire I had worn the previous day. We'll call it the semi-formal outfit. Nothing eventful happened on the way back, and upon reaching the path to the manor, I noticed it was probably around 6 o'clock. The front door opened on my approach and I was greeted by Reginald, the head butler. "Ah, Sir Gilgamesh, welcome back." "Reginald," I nodded back. "Dinner is just about to be served, if you would follow me to the dining room," and I did just that. Upon entering the fancy dining room I was greeted by Hajime, Cheryl, Cirilla and Aaron. Aaron had his own little meal prepared in a bowl on the floor which he was entirely distracted by. They all gave me a warm greeting as I took a seat across from Cirilla. Hajime was the first to speak after the greetings. "Haven't seen you around all day," he started. "Were you in town?" I nodded. Yes, I managed to come across Henry and decided to tail him for a bit. Food was then served to all of us. The plate consisted of a steak with potatoes and some greens on the side. "Did you find anything?" asked Cheryl. I shook my head. Nothing groundbreaking so far. I did however find where he likes to frequent. "Is that good?" asked Cirilla. I nodded. Yes, I do plan on running into him a few times tomorrow, which reminds me, I looked to Cirilla. "Would you like to go on a date tomorrow?" She was processing my words for a minute before she mumbled out a yes. I gave her a smile. "Very well, tomorrow morning we shall spend the day together." With business concluded, we spent the rest of the meal talking about mundane things. We did spend a small amount of time talking about the places I saw. Overall it was definitely nice having dinner with the Toketsus. It reminded me of how dinner usually went with my family back home. After a small portion of cheesecake for dessert, we all either had tea or coffee to finish it all off. I spoke up after the cheesecake. "Do we have a time frame on when the wedding is supposed to take place?" Hajime didn't have an answer and he said that Cheryl was organizing it. "I plan on 3 days from now at the cathedral in the center of town." It has been quite difficult to get it done on such short notice, but I did have some time beforehand if you chose to accept the quest. I apologize for putting all this stress on you. I never planned a wedding in my past life, but I did know they were extremely hard to plan. She gave a small wave. "No need to worry, it gives me a peace of mind that Henry will finally get put in his place." And it gives me some practice for when she really does get married, she finished off with a clap of her hands and a smile. I chuckled while Cyrilla gained an embarrassed look as she called out to her mom, which we all shared a slight chuckle at. After another hour or so the sun was starting to set, I stood from the table and addressed the family. It has been a pleasant night and the food was great, but I shall take a small walk around the yard and head to sleep. Maybe take a bath after my walk. We all went our separate ways and eventually I headed to sleep after I took a walk and a quick bath to end off the night. Morning eventually came and I woke up fairly early. The sun was just beginning to rise as I woke up from a very nice sleep. I got out of the bed and headed toward the window in the room that overlooked the backyard. I was wearing a loose pair of black pants and a long-sleeve white shirt as I took in the morning rays. The life of luxury sure is nice, but I can't wait to get back home to Axel. I'll do my best to actually enjoy today and be good company. It definitely has been a long time since I hung out with someone. The last person I think was Darkness, and that was back on our first quest. I then shook my head. Well, I guess on the quest to kill that second Death Knight I spent time with her and the other team, but still it was months ago. After a few minutes of admiring the rising sun, I headed out the door to the room I was in and flashed on a pair of shoes. Making my way down the hallway and down the stairs to the main floor, I headed out the back door. I passed Reginald on the way out, who seemed to be doing his early morning duties. After a short greeting and asking him if he could arrange some transport, he left to continue his tasks. With no other maids or butlers around, I conjured one of the chairs from my gate and sat down to just watch the sun in silence. Not long after, I heard someone exit the manor and enter the backyard behind me. Already knowing who it was, I turned my head slightly. "Good morning, you ready to go?" Cyrilla, the one behind me, let out a yawn before replying, "Good morning, and yes, I'm ready to go." She was wearing a yellow sundress and white flat shoes. We made our way to the front of the manor and saw Reginald speaking to a carriage driver that was at the front steps. After a brief introduction to the driver, we climbed in and started to talk. "What do you have planned for today?" Cyrilla asked. "It wouldn't be fun to tell you where and when we're going places. Might as well enjoy ourselves as much as we can," was my only response, along with the usual smirk I gave people. The ride to the main part of town was fairly uneventful. We mostly had small talk and enjoyed each other's company to pass the time. When we arrived to the point where carriages and such couldn't go any further, we exited and thanked the driver for his services. I even gave him a tip, which he was grateful for. The streets weren't particularly crowded since it was still somewhat early in the morning, so we were able to move around fairly well. After about 10 minutes of walking, we came to our first destination, the coffee shop. We sat outside on a small patio that the place had, and I sat in a way where I would be facing the way which Henry should come from. We both ordered our coffees and had some pleasant conversations to pass the time. Cyrilla asked a question that stopped me for a moment. "What do you want to do after you retire from adventuring?" That definitely got me thinking. What do I want to do? What is my endgame? It took me some time to answer the question. I'm not sure yet, honestly. I put my hand to my chin. Since I arrived in Axel and started adventuring, I just decided to go with the flow and have as much fun as possible. But for the future, I guess settle down and have a family, but that won't be for a while, so I have time. She nodded at that. I guess I could say the same, just not the adventuring part. I want to help people somehow when I'm older, maybe do some kind of business like my father, but more about medicine and helping people. Seems as good of a goal as any. Helping people is always good, but I'd rather stick to adventuring and help people while also fighting tough monsters. I also like collecting magic weapons and items to store in my gate. After I said that, I shifted my eyes slightly and was able to see a certain someone in the distance. Our eyes met as I stared down the man I was here to piss off, the good old Henry Fraser. Cyrilla didn't seem to notice as we continued to speak. Eventually, our eyes met and had a small stare down. I could see the gears turning in his brain before his stare went murderous. He was still a ways away and Cyrilla had just finished her coffee, so I stood and walked to her side while holding out my arm for her to grab. "Now why don't we continue our date?" I asked with the most charming smile that I could. It had the desired effect I wanted it to, considering I could see Henry from the corner of my eye. Cyrilla blushed for a moment before she stood and took my arm as we walked off, and boy, I could feel those eyes on the back of my head. He stormed off in another direction and I internally smirked. Now we continue with the day and see what happens. And we did just that. We spent almost the whole day walking through town, stopping at various food stalls, walking through small parks and finishing off at the golf course. I definitely had a few laughs at her expense when she missed her swing or it only went a couple yards. I did get in close at one point and show her how to properly hit the ball. I was by no means a pro golfer in my life as Michael, but my dad did show me a thing or two, plus I do have enhanced strength with this body. Plus I am a high level, so I have more strength and dexterity than your average adventurer. And at some point in the day I could feel as if we were being followed, whether it was Henry following us or not, I didn't know. I don't think Henry would be following us the whole time, I thought to myself as I swung my club, hitting the ball a good 300 yards. He could be having someone watch us. I bent down and put another ball on the tee before swinging. The sun will be starting to set in an hour or so. I should probably send Cyrilla off with a driver and see if whoever following me persists. I was brought out of my thoughts when I bent down again and there were no balls left in the basket. I turned to Cyrilla, who finished up with her last ball, didn't hit it very far, but she was getting better. You're getting better, I said, but our time today has come to an end. We brought our baskets back and made our way back to where the carriage driver should be meeting us, and the whole time I could still feel me being watched. After a short while we were getting close to the carriage and the sun was setting behind us, casting a beautiful glow onto the streets, Cyrilla then turned to me. I had a really fun time today. I enjoyed myself as well. It's been a while since I relaxed a bit. After that, we made it to the driver who would take Cyrilla home. But when I didn't get in, she seemed confused. Are you not coming? I shook my head. Not right now. I have some business to take care of. She seemed confused but nodded. I'll see you later then. Before the driver headed off, I used my gate as discreetly as I could and handed her a dagger, but made sure not to be seen. Keep this close just in case. She tried to ask why I gave her it, but before she could say anything I shut the carriage door and sent them off. I turned around and glanced at a building to my left. Now let's deal with our little stalker, I grinned. For the next 30 or so minutes I walked throughout town, for what seemed aimlessly, and put my hand to my forehead and sighed exasperatedly on a completely empty street. Oh no. I seemed to be lost. I looked around the empty street and spotted a dark alley. Ah, there the street is. I'll take a shortcut. Slowly, I walked to the dark alley, and about halfway through the alley, I felt a presence behind me. But before I could turn around, I lifted up my right arm and tilted my head to the left and caught a dart between two fingers. Well, I heard a small breath hitch behind me. What is this? I look at the dart and see something dripping off it ever so slightly. I didn't even need appraisal to know what it was. Poison. Now why would a poison dart be aimed for my head? Would you know, good sir? I turned around with the dart still in between my fingers with a smirk that radiated the smuggest energy I could produce. I didn't receive an answer as I stared into the darkness. I then flicked the dart at high speeds into the darkness and I saw a dagger flash to block the dart. My supposed assassin realized that I knew where he was and made a dash for the alley exit. You're not escaping so easily. I let out a laugh as a gate opened behind me which shot out a chain that lashed out and wrapped itself around the assassin's leg. The chain started to pull back and the would-be assassin fell face first onto the ground. After dismissing the chain before he could get a clear view of it, I approached him slowly. When I made it close, he turned over and saw that I was approaching. He tried to run away, but in a burst of speed I picked him up off the ground by his throat and pinned him against the wall. The upper half of his face was covered by a black cloak with a hood, but that didn't matter too much to me as I slowly applied more pressure to his throat. He was wearing an all-black outfit with a few pouches along his waist along with the black hooded cloak. Now tell me. My eyes glowed ominously in the dark. Did our mutual friend send you? My only response was some wheezing. Oh, I smirked. My bad. I then let go and the assassin hit the floor. He was holding his throat as I bent down to his level. Answer the question, friend. My only response was the man flicking his wrist as a dagger fell from his sleeve and dropped into his hand. I saw this easily and swatted his hand as it reached my face. It was thrown from his hand and clattered on the floor. I leaned in close and whispered, that's gonna cost you a rib, friend. I slowly put my thumb on one of his ribs and slowly pushed, causing a small snap. The man tried to scream, but I jammed some cloth I found on the ground into his mouth. After a muffled cry of pain, I removed the cloth. You going to tell me what I want to know? He nodded quickly. Henry Fraser sent you, didn't he? He nodded. He came to me yesterday. Where did he meet you? I didn't get a response, so I slowly put my thumb on another rib. Where did he meet you? He gulped audibly. There's a secret bar on the other side of town. Where exactly? Across the small bridge that goes over the canal. What's special about this place? Lots of people use it for fronts, shady deals, and a place to look for people like me. So there's a bar used as a front for all kinds of trafficking and a place to hire assassins. This sounds like it's straight out of a comic book. Maybe if I scoped the place out I could find some more info about Henry. Doubt I could get much evidence to use against him though. I glanced at the would-be assassin. And how does one get into this place? Not many people know about it, so just being able to find it is good enough, or just look intimidating enough. I smirked. That won't be too hard. I then bonked him on the head which caused him to pass out. I think I'll borrow your cloak there. I took his cloak off and sent it to my gate momentarily so it would be clean when I used it. Don't want to wear some random assassin's cloak, probably hasn't been washed in a while. I then set off towards this supposed secret bar. I have more clothes in my gate so being able to blend in shouldn't be hard. I could have done that while following Fraser earlier, but wearing a hood like that in public isn't the best idea. After a short while I reached the area of town I needed to be in and flashed on a new attire. It consisted of a long-sleeved black shirt that was rolled up to my forearms, dark gray cargo-like pants, black shoes, and the black hooded cloak I took from the unnamed assassin. After I crossed the canal I flipped up the hood and closed my eyes. Now let's see if I can find the place with my eyes. After focusing for a few minutes I opened my eyes and it was almost like my eyes were guiding me down a few pathways and down a set of stone stairs that were hidden away and lead to a door in a dark alley. I didn't cross paths with anyone on the way into the alley so my travel was unhindered. Good thing I invested some levels into my eyes, definitely should do it some more. After approaching a door in the alley I noticed a small slot at the top, which was most likely a viewing spot for a doorman. After knocking on the door the slot slid open and a set of hardened brown eyes stared at me. "What do you want?" the deep voice rumbled. My only response was to look up enough to show my glowing red eyes but keep my face hidden. "I want in." He stared at me for a moment and closed the slot. I then heard some locks and such being twisted and opened before the man opened the door. He was at least 6 foot, bald and had some scars on his face. He was wearing a tight black short-sleeved shirt showing off his muscles and black pants. "I haven't seen you around before but I will be keeping a close eye on you so don't think about doing anything funny." I walked past the bald scarred bouncer and went down a short hallway before opening another door that led into the main bar. Upon opening the door I was greeted with the scent of alcohol and some other drugs in the air. Definitely got the right place. It seems there was an almost purple glow to the place with how the lights in the place were situated. Almost looks like a strip club back on Earth. Other than the smell of the place it didn't look too bad with lavish dark purple booths and a nice dark wooden bar off to the side. There were all sorts of people throughout the place, most of them being males and most of the ladies seemed to be working ladies. Looks like a strip club back on Earth, but has the vibe of a comic book gentleman's club where all sorts of shit happens. Fantastic. After a quick look around I saw the man I was looking for in a booth across the bar, the man, the myth, the legend, Henry Fraser. He was with his buddies laughing it up over something while he had scantily clad women on each arm. Nice, he wants Cirilla but can't keep his hands off other women. I wonder what else he likes to do around here. Before I could make any movements to sit somewhere I was approached by one of the women in the bar. She was wearing what you'd expect to see a working woman wear in a strip club. She was wearing a red bikini-like outfit that showed off as much of her body as it could. She had pink hair that went down to the middle of her back, red eyes and a pair of heels that made her look slightly taller but she was still an inch or two under me. She leaned forward to try and get a good look at me, her large breasts barely being concealed by her outfit. "A new customer I see," she smiled, "would you like to have some fun?" I smirked. This could be a good opportunity to get some info. Looking directly at her, my face still being concealed for the most part, I responded, "I couldn't turn down a beautiful woman like you now, could I?" She chuckled, "A charmer I see." She smiled and walked off with a sway in her hips. "Follow me," she said in a seductive voice. I followed her and she led me through a doorway that led down a hallway lined with rooms. My enhanced hearing picked up the sounds of moans and grunts in a few of the rooms. And once again I find myself in a situation that would have never happened before. I mean, I went to a strip club once in my life with some friends but there was nothing like this in there, but this is a fantasy world so I shouldn't be surprised by stuff like this. We stopped at a room closer to the end of the hallway and she opened the door and motioned me inside to follow. I followed her in and she shut the door when I entered. The room was dark and only had a few candles for light that casted a light glow on the room. There were a few couches and seats around the small room but there was also a decent-sized bed in the middle which was obviously meant for more inappropriate things. I turned around to face the women again and she sauntered her way over with a smile on her face and wrapped her arms around my neck and removed the hood. "Oh my, you're a handsome one." She traced my jawline with her finger, "probably the most handsome I've seen." She then leaned in close, her lips only a few inches from mine. "Now, what can I do for you?" "Sorry to disappoint but I'm looking for information." She then frowned slightly and unwrapped her arms from my neck. I knew it was too good to be true. She sighed, "I might know what you want. You got to provide payment for what you want." "I'm looking for information on one of, what I'm assuming is a regular of this place, Henry Fraser." She sighed and frowned some more. "The payment comes first." "What's the payment?" She shrugged. "It can be whatever I want it to be, and while Henry is a bit of scumbag, even compared to the usual clientele, I'm not giving info away for free." "Understandable." She huffed. Usually whenever someone asks for info from me they're practically ogling me. But you show restraint inside of me, she smirked at the last bit. Well, if I was my old self back on Earth, I'd either be blushing up a storm or too nervous to say anything. Another perk of being in this body, I guess I didn't respond and merely just smirked back. She tapped her chin a few times in a thinking manner before she responded, I think I know what I want. A lecherous smirk graced her features. My guess from your smile is it's not money, is it? She shook her head. I can guess what it is you want, but why? She sighed. Well, for one, you are probably the finest looking man I've ever seen come through here. We both smirked, and you just seem different. Makes me want you even more. She looked directly into my eyes. That is my payment. I want you for as long as I want. And some money wouldn't hurt. She wrapped her arms around my neck again and smashed her lips onto mine. My mind was racing for a moment before I calmed down and returned the kiss. Freaking hell, this is my first kiss and now I'm gonna lose my virginity. I ain't complaining though. Damn, I love this life. Letting instinct take over, I lifted her up while still kissing her and brought her over to the bed, and we undressed in between kissing. What followed was the best night of my life by far, this world and the last by a million times. After hours we laid in the bed and were both panting slightly with sheens of sweat on both our bodies. She looked to me and propped herself up on one of her elbows while she traced a finger on my chiseled chest. I haven't had that much fun in a long time, she sighed, but all good things come to an end, I suppose. I chuckled in response. I guess this means you'll tell me what I want to know. Alright, ask away. I know he isn't one of the best people around since he sent an assassin after me. She tilted her head and her eyes widened slightly. He did? How did you get away from them? I chuckled. I'm an adventurer. You are? She was surprised. Yes, and I'm here at the request of a family to get him arrested. Oh wow, she was surprised. Well, he mostly deals in the drug trades and I've heard rumors about sex trafficking, but I don't know if that's entirely true. What kind of drugs? The usual stuff you hear about, cocaine, meth and even drugs infused with magic. So he's a shitty mob boss that deals in drugs? She chuckled at that. You could say that. She frowned shortly after that. I've seen him hurt people who don't pay him and he's not exactly nice when he partakes in our services. And you can't get him kicked out of this place. Yeah, he is in too good of relations with the politicians and guards, so even if we got him out he'd get this place shut down. We need this place to make money. She seemed upset as she looked down while still propped up on an elbow. I'm guessing you're not the biggest fan of working here. She chuckled slightly. No, not really, but when the sex is as good as it was just now, I can't complain. We both chuckled as I had a thought. Well, I can't just do nothing. After that I turned to her and slowly sat up. Well, I did promise you money as well. Hold out your hand. She sat up and the bed sheet managed to keep her breasts covered. She had a questioning gaze as she looked at me, then held her hands out. A golden portal opened above her which caused her to stare at it in wonder before a bag of Eris dropped into her hands. She was surprised about the weight, and when she opened it up her eyes bulged. This is a lot of Eris. Most I've seen at once. Chuckling, I responded with, when you're as good as an adventurer as me this kind of money is nothing. Are you sure? Yes, keep the money and leave this place if you want. She didn't know what to say, so I just stood up and got ready to leave. While I was getting dressed she finally said something after a short chuckle. I didn't even get your name. Gilgamesh. I feel as if I've heard that name before. Maybe you have. I am fairly great after all. We both chuckled. What's your name? Ela. Well, Ela, if you're ever in Axel don't be afraid to stop by the Adventurers Guild and say hi. I then walked out the room. I think I got the info I needed. I walked back into the main area of the bar and towards the exit, and I think I got an idea on what to do next. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.